Let's now speak to Anthony Lowenstein, joining us live from Sydney, Australia. He's a Middle East affairs analyst and author of My Israel Questions. Thank you for coming on. We're just hearing from Hezbollah. They're warning that any harm to civilians in those latest strikes will lead to severe and harsh punishment, and vows to strongly oppose any aggression. Do you think there's now a risk that this could develop into an all-out war in the Middle East?
I mean, let's certainly hope not. I mean, the possibility of that has really been on tenterhooks for about 10 months, where obviously Israel has been striking Hezbollah, Hezbollah's been striking back. Neither side, and I include Iran in that equation, has been particularly keen for any kind of full-out regional war. And that's been also the position of Washington, although Washington, of course, is blindly supporting Israel, to be clear, and Iran is supporting Hezbollah. Look, at this stage, it's too early to tell, but I think there is still a belief, hopefully not a delusional one, that all-out war will not happen because, frankly, neither side will win in that case. Lebanon will be destroyed. Israel has stated that for years. And vast parts of Israel will be destroyed by Hezbollah rockets. And it really benefits no one by doing so. It's worth saying, though, just finally, that there are certain elements, though, within the Israeli state, including in the government around Netanyahu, who have called for a long time, since October 7, but certainly before, for all-out war with Lebanon, that somehow was the necessary and right thing to do. And it would be a form, frankly, of insanity. And already we're seeing Israel's main airport is now delaying flights. It may be shut down for a period of time. And essentially, if that airport shuts down, Israel is isolated. There are land borders, of course. But without an airport, Israel's a tiny country. They are pretty isolated, frankly.
And we know that Israel has declared a 48-hour state of emergency in response to this. There were 200 rockets fired from Lebanon into Israel. They have their Iron Dome system, defense system, which intercepted some of them. But do you think Israel was expecting this level of response from Hezbollah?
Look, they're obviously expecting some response, as they have been from Iran itself. And Iran, I guess, has put that on hold as far as we know at the moment. Obviously, Hezbollah was going to respond to the killing of one of their leaders a while ago. The actual timing of that was a bit unclear. I mean, obviously, whether Israeli intelligence realised or knew that before. My sense is that before these attacks, there was some so-called preemptive attacks by Israel onto Lebanon. I mean, this really is a situation that, frankly, benefits nobody here. That massive escalation is something that I think only really benefits either the fanatics in Israel who are desperate for a regional war, in the belief that if there is a regional war that either Israel launches or otherwise, that the US would come to Israel's side, which I think is a fair assessment, whether it's Biden or Trump or Harris if she wins in a few months. So this has been a long-term goal of potentially defanging what they regard, they being Israel, of Tehran, of Iran, of their major enemy in the region, a perceived enemy. It's worth saying, though, as someone who's written about this for a long time, that many years ago, Iran and Israel were very, very good friends. I mean, Iran was a dictatorship back in the 60s and 70s. And the idea potentially that we have a situation now where all-out war is the only so-called solution to this is absurd and wrong. And the only way this would de-escalate is massive pressure from the US again on Israel to not escalate. And we've seen little evidence of that because a ceasefire in Gaza remains again out of reach because Israel refuses to potentially remove all its troops from Gaza.
And Anthony, we know that if this were to escalate with Lebanon, that they don't have the capabilities that Israel has. But if it does evolve to become an all-out war in the Middle East, do you think Israel will have the capabilities to defend itself?
Without the US, no. And yes, they have the Iron Dome, but we've seen pretty clearly in Gaza in the last 10 months that obviously Gaza has been rendered unlivable, but militarily Hamas remains standing. There are still fighters, there are still resistance. Israel has been unable to defeat what is essentially an insurgent army in Gaza. Hezbollah is a whole different kettle of fish. They are a much bigger military force. They're a much bigger guerrilla force. They have far more rockets than Hamas does. And without US support, including air support, I think Israel would find it very difficult, frankly, to fight two wars at the same time. Two wars meaning one in Gaza, one in Lebanon, or potentially even further afield with the Houthis or elsewhere who would maybe get on side and declare more formal war against Israel. So this is the idea of a regional war here is something that many of us have feared for years and years. We haven't really seen a regional war like this in the modern era. And there's a reason for that, because at least some people in every country, sanity has prevailed, that all that regional war benefits nobody. And the idea that in Lebanon, which is a country economically very, very vulnerable, there are not really many bomb shelters, it's an incredibly grim possibility for the civilians of Lebanon, some of whom support Hezbollah and some of them, frankly, who don't. And Lebanon has very few allies, to be honest, globally, and that puts the Lebanese people in an incredibly vulnerable position.
And we've had, of course, 40 strikes in South Lebanon this morning, waiting to hear if there were any civilian casualties. Hezbollah has warned that any harm to civilians will lead to severe and harsh punishment. They've also vowed to strongly oppose any aggression. We spoke there about Lebanon and having their own issues domestically. How do you think people are feeling there this morning?
Worried, concerned, and scared that that kind of possibility, which they have long feared, could happen. I mean, the possibility of all-out war with Israel and Lebanon has been on the cards in people's minds for years, ever since the war in 2006 between Israel and Hezbollah, where Israel, frankly, did not win because they could not defeat Hezbollah. So it was almost, you could argue, a draw of sorts. But here we are close to 20 years later, and the people of Lebanon, some of whom I've had contact with in the last months, are scared. People live their lives and they're not paralysed with fear. But the tourist season, which is a massively important part of Lebanese economy, has still been going on, but has been impacted by the tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. And ultimately, again, the elephant in the room is the fact that there is no ceasefire in Gaza. Many sides of this conflict, including Hezbollah, have said that if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, an end to that war, the possibility of massive escalation would stop, or hugely reduce at least. Because there is no ceasefire in Gaza, because Israel refuses to end that war and remove its troops, we are now potentially on the precipice of something far more serious. And that's the elephant in the room here. It's the Gaza ceasefire and the lack of it.
OK, Anthony Lowenstein, thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.